Maybe. Hey there, and welcome to the Empowered Nutrition Podcast. Erin Skinner here, and I'm just really thrilled to welcome you, Dr. Lucy Burns, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Erin, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my gosh, a pleasure to have you. Your work is so phenomenal. I can tell you've helped so many people with your work. And so I thought maybe we could just start with that of tell me what real life medicine is all about and maybe a little bit about how your journey in terms of what got you into this work.
Absolutely. So, look, I think like lots of women, was a dieting queen. I started my dieting
Yeah.
career when I was about 16, I think with the Scarsdale diet. And, I've done lots of all the diets, the soup diet, the Israeli army diet, the cabbage diet, all of those diets, because in my brain, there was something wrong with me. I needed to be smaller, thinner, and all of those in my brain equaled better.
Mm.
And I look in retrospect now, and that there's that beautiful clip that talks. It's a sort of a song about Victoria's Secret where it talks about, if you could tell yourself what you would tell when you were younger. And I
Mm.
just look and I go, I had I was normal healthy weight when I
Yeah.
started dieting, and I just look back and I think, oh gosh, if only I'd known. But that's okay.
Yeah.
So the 30 plus years of dieting, basically I ended up to a point where I was the heaviest I'd ever been.
Yeah.
I was heavier than when I was pregnant, 9 months pregnant. I had fatty liver disease. I had moved into the obese BMI, and I had pre-diabetes. And as a medical doctor, this was sort of a tiny bit rubbish.
Mm.
And I was grappling with this idea, should I just kind of just give up? I was in my late 40s and I thought, my husband still loves me. I'll just buy waisted pants. There's no big deal. And because the only way I knew to lose weight was to really diet. And I just didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, I happened to come across, I went on holidays with a gorgeous friend of mine who was looking very, very well. And I just said to her, oh my God, you look amazing. What are you doing? And she said, oh, I've ditched the carbs. And I initially asked about it. And I just said, oh, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm just not doing it.
Mm.
And because we were away for 2 weeks, I actually got to see what she was doing. And I
Mm.
realized that, she was eating a magnificent food, because for
Mm.
me, dieting was always about eating diet food.
Mhm.
So it was, you know, low fat, hyper processed yogurts. It was steak without any meat, any fat on it. And it was, it was lean. It was horrible. And when I saw
Mm.
what she was eating, I'm thinking, oh my God, I felt like,
Yeah.
Sally from Harry Met Sally. I thought, I want what she's got. And so I thought, I'll give it a crack. It was like my last attempt. And the thing that happened was that, like, for the first time, I was able to not be hungry. Like, I was
Mm.
eating. And I think because, I'd always done low fat, always.
Mhm.
And finally, I had some fat in my diet, and I thought, "Oh my God, this is like a miracle."
Yeah.
And so I then, thought, "Oh, well, look, I might just look into this because I feel so amazing." And suddenly, like lots of people who do low carb or keto, you suddenly feel a bit like a zealot, like you've got to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And and I was fortunate enough to be in a position where, as a doctor, I could tell everybody that
Mhm.
I met. So I kind of set up a business, which initially I called Epiphany Medical Weight Loss, because I felt
Mhm.
like I'd had an epiphany. But a couple of things happened with that word. One was, some people didn't know what an epiphany was. Some people pronounced it epiphany, and that's just not not a helpful
Awkward.
word.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I just thought, you know what? This is just real life. Like, I'm just a real life person. There's nothing special about me. I'm just a real life woman living a real life, with real life struggles, exactly the same as other real life women. So I
Yeah.
joined forces with another real life doctor called Dr. Mary Barson, who's just a beautiful, beautiful human. And yeah, real life medicine was born.
Yeah.
And it's been magnificent, just revolutionized my practice, everything I do.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. It's so relatable. And I also help women with the same challenges, also with a low carb approach. And it is, as you said, it can be amazing um, when you can help somebody. It's kind of ironic, I guess, is what I'm kind of trying to
Mhm.
get at, is that you're trying to help somebody get away from yo-yo chronic unhealthy dieting. So it almost feels like, maybe to the outside world, I wonder if it looks crazy to like then offer them another diet. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious if you feel like you've ever had where you've felt like there's a conflict with that, or does this work feel to you like it's beneficial in the sense of like, yes, it's another eating framework, but this time one that actually like helps women to actually be in a healthier, happier place.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. And I will confess that my initial approach to low carb was a diet. It was like, right, okay, I'll do another diet.
Mm,
But a couple of things have, I guess we've navigated because I feel sometimes like it is this landmine that you're or this war that you're navigating between diet culture and then just forgetting everything and just eat what you want. And
mm,
particularly the food industry
mm,
loves to sort of conflate all of the messaging and make us confused. So the way we look at it is, look, we don't do macros. People can do macros if they want to, but we
mm,
don't recommend macros. We basically use a really basic framework of an eating plan, which is you pick your protein. Protein's so beautiful.
mhm,
Add some veggies, non-starchy veggies, add some fat and add some flavor. And the flavor is herbs, spices, salt. So it's sort of really simple. But
mhm,
I think the one thing we would say is that the way to approach this is you're looking after your physiology. So the majority of people these days who are overweight are insulin resistant, as I was. So this is a framework which addresses that insulin resistance at its core with food rather than medication. We can do medication. So if some people choose to do that, that's fine. You're the boss of you. You can do whatever you want. But
mhm,
here's an option that you can do it with food. But then the second part of it is really the what we call the psychology. So really untangling mind management. And people think mindset is willpower, and it's not. It's actually undoing stories that you've been conditioned to believe over decades. First of all, recognizing them, undoing them, rewriting them. And only then can you do this in a long, sustainable way. If you approach low carb like another diet, it will be a short term fix and you will just go back to yo yoing.
absolutely. Yeah, and I like how you're real food focused, and that's also what I use in my low
Mm,
carb program. And I do find that we have to really work on that, because a lot of times people are trying to go find that like keto bar and keto cereal and keto
yeah.
all the things with like 20 ingredients. And so it sounds like you help people with sort of how to like actually get, like, for example, enough fiber and like all their micronutrients, and avoid sort of that kind of like crash processed food.
Oh, absolutely. And again, real life, it's about real food
Mhm,
because you're absolutely right. And we spend a lot of time educating people on the fact that these companies, food companies, which advertise that they're trying to help you, they advertise that, they're going to make dinner time fast or they're going to make meal prep easy. They're not. They're just trying to sell you a product. And they will use whatever manipulative marketing they can. And they'll slap a great big star on the front that says keto for some cauliflower pizza base, which has, like, as you said, a million ingredients, and in fact is not healthy and has about 1% cauliflower in it. So, yeah,
yeah, totally.
just beware marketing mischief.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love how you do that. And then tell me a little bit about mindset in terms of like what are some of those like beliefs and stories that you find to be really common?
Yeah, so look, some of them are obvious and, well, they're obvious until, but they're not always obvious to the person who has them. So I had a lot of mindset or my long-held beliefs around particularly sugar. So for me, sugar was a treat. It was something I would use to cheer myself up. It was something I would use when I was bored. It was something that made, I thought it made my
Yeah.
life complete.
It's low
And I just
fat.
remember, yeah, absolutely. A bag of those sort of lolly snakes was low fat. And I just remember thinking that, lying on the couch reading a book with a bag of lollies was just bliss. And it wasn't until I realized, I guess, that the dopamine effect of particularly sugar and processed carbs, what I was actually looking for. And it was a hit. I was basically looking for a hit of pleasure. And I now realize I can get that from many, many other things.
Mhm,
So, really just helping people unpack that. But one of the biggest ones that is so common, and again, this is from diet culture, is the idea that if you make a slip or a mistake, or you find yourself, let's say you've eaten a cookie,
mhm.
and then you go, I've ruined it. So you just go, bugger it, I'll eat the whole box and start again tomorrow.
Yeah,
So people press the stuff it bucket button all the time. And this mindset that you can start again tomorrow, I mean, we all did it. And it was like,
yeah,
it's a combination of things with that. It's scarcity mindset. Like your brain goes, oh my God, you're never going to have this again because tomorrow you're going to be perfect and you will never, ever, ever get the opportunity. So quick, do it all now.
yeah,
But I have a little story where I like to say, but you know what? Imagine if you've decided you're going to clean out your garage. So you decide you're going to clean out your garage on Saturday, and you don't go around to your neighbor's house that weekend and collect all their junk and put it in your garage so that you can clean it out again on Monday. But that's what we do when we start eating everything in sight to get rid of it
mhm,
so that we can be perfect on Monday. So, a couple of things about that get rid of it idea. So, people have the idea of getting rid of it is eating it. Like they just can't quite come to the idea that maybe you could chuck it out
right.
because that's food wastage. And, food wastage is a sin akin to murder in some people's minds.
Yeah,
And so rather than waste it, they'll eat it. But my favorite saying is your body's not the bin. You don't need to eat it to get rid of it. You
yeah,
can actually just chuck it out if you want to.
yeah,
People go, I'll give it to the dog. Half the time the dog, it's not good for the dog either.
yeah,
It's
your dog
actually
can't
it's often not
yes,
good for anybody.
no.
Yeah, just permission to throw it out. You don't actually no nobody's counting. Nobody's, counting whether you've thrown out food. Nobody.
Yeah.
Just chuck it out.
Such a good example. I have had cases where I felt like it was truly a food waste feeling, but then I've had cases where I really kind of felt like the food waste was kind of the excuse, but the real thing was more fear. Like
Mm.
every time I meet with you, you're still telling me that you haven't yet eaten through the stuff that you had bought. And so I'm pretty sure you've had like 3 months to eat it. I'm pretty sure you could have eaten it by
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, yeah.
It can be scary, to, almost I feel like kinda getting back to what you're talking about before of, like, if you tried a lot of things before, I feel like it can be,
Yep.
like, hard to trust and believe and even be all in on something because 'cause you've failed so many times. It's like you don't wanna keep failing. You don't wanna set yourself up for failure. It's almost less scary to just not, like, fully believe in something and try it. I wonder if you ever
Yes.
experienced that.
Oh, absolutely. Fear of failure is massive because
Yeah.
people have failed, you know, and I'm using failed air quotes in the past. But we and this is a navigating, so navigating the path between perfectionism and recommitting if you have a slip
Mm.
is the key. So, we teach a lot about the idea of self-compassion, and people are worried that if they're too compassionate with themselves, that they'll just be letting themselves off the hook all the time and giving themselves excuses to eat whatever they want. But
Mhm.
that's quite different. And you actually do know, in yourself whether you're truly being compassionate or whether you're just using that as an excuse. And so becoming really honest with yourself is one of our things again that we teach. And one of my favorite lines, I've got a lot of favorite lines, but another one is that, permanent weight loss is a self-development journey. It's not a meal plan.
Yeah.
A meal plan is never going to lead you to permanent weight loss, but understanding yourself really, really well, knowing yourself well, and doing that, you can only do that with kindness and compassion. You can't
Mhm.
berate yourself well, and you can't hate yourself thin.
Yeah.
You just really need to understand yourself and understand why those stories that your brain offers you are there. And one, are they true? Often they're not. Two, do you need to listen to them? Often not.
Mhm.
And looking, I guess, at why our brain offers us, various stories about what it wants to do, and recognizing that, we talk a lot about the idea that for the majority, we think that we want to eat food for the taste, and there is a small component of that, but the majority of the reason we want to eat it is for the dopamine hit.
Mhm.
Because if it was all about the taste, you would just chew it and then spit it out. And nobody does that. Or they would invent, chocolate flavored chewing gum that tasted just like chocolate, which I'm absolutely sure they could invent, but nobody would buy it because it's not actually the taste. We think it's the taste, but it's not.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I've been on a really deep dive lately with alcohol, like brain chemistry and physiology
Mm.
around like addiction and alcohol and what happens over with like chronic sort of like but like normal use with that sort of like
Yes.
typical alcohol drinker. And I feel like it is very similar. And in fact, one thing I was learning is that like people who stop drinking alcohol will have more cravings for sugar often for a while because the brain is seeking that dopamine that it was getting with the alcohol. Um, and then sugar is another means of getting that. And so, like, back to your point around the self journey is sort of like recognizing that this is a brain chemistry sort of. I think addiction is probably a controversial word around sugar, but let's be honest, there is a brain chemistry thing happening with sugar that if you don't realize that, then it's more easy to be tricked into some type of reductive reasoning that you can just kind of like calculate your way out of this with the eating the right amount of calories. But in the end, whether it's calories or grams of carbohydrate or exchanges or whatever it is, Weight Watchers points, I don't care, there's always going to be moments where you're seeking that hit, and if you haven't done the mental work around your reason why and like how to work through it if you do have a slip up, and how to, like as you said, give yourself grace, um, you're going to mess up those calculations, and it's going to every time there's going to be problems with it, and then it's not, and then you'll have a hard time getting back on track. So it really does in the end, I think, I agree with you that comes down to like you have to have both. You have to have
Yes.
the mental game going on, but you also can't ignore that there's like a physical thing that happens with food in terms of like the dopamine, the insulin resistance plays a major role in it as well. And so I like how you approach it from both of those ends because I do too. And I find that like it's frustrating to me how often I'll see people who are like just in one camp, like you just need to
Yes.
think your way out of this, or you just need to eat the right thing, and completely ignoring like the other half side of the coin. You know what I mean?
Ah, 100%, Erin,
Yeah.
100%. And I think that, you can absolutely slip into diet culture using low carb slash keto, and it's unhelpful. Long term, it's unhelpful. So it's really about this, changing language, recognizing again what your brain is saying. So your thoughts, which is what your brain is saying, sometimes they're not even true. Like we've just got this idea that everything our brain says to us is true, and quite often it's not.
Yeah.
But it, quite often, unless you're talking with somebody else or you're in a group with somebody else, you have no idea. You just because there's no need to question your brain if you're just by yourself. So if you're in the thick of it,
Yeah.
um, and it's interesting. I absolutely believe in sugar and processed carbohydrate addiction. and I think that some of the controversy comes again from, you've got to look at with a lot of studies who's funding them. And for some of them, it's the processed food industry. They don't want to have their food labeled addictive. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
trillion-dollar industry. So they have roots that are very, very deep and influence
Yeah.
some, very high ranking professionals, health professionals, government professionals.
Yeah, like the
It's
US dietary guidelines that recommend you go up to a certain amount of sugar every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's words, like in Australia, and I think in the States. So, it used to be called junk food. Like, call it what it is. It is food that's devoid of any nutrition. So therefore it's junk food. And now it's called discretionary items, which
Yeah.
sounds, or snack food.
Yeah.
So,
Lobbying.
there's yeah, there's so much around all of that. And I think people, again, you get to decide exactly what you want to do. I always say to all of our women, you're the boss of you. You really are. But you need to make decisions based on with all the information, not just, you
Mhm.
know, um, filtered information.
Totally. You know what I think would be amazing is almost if we could do like a speed round. Like I just wrote down like 5, I think, common like fears or maybe fears is a good word for it that people have around low carb eating. Each one could probably be its own episode, but maybe what
Yeah.
we could do is like start with maybe you could tell me a little bit about the mechanism of like why low carb, why does that feel different from like a satiety and a sustainability standpoint? And then maybe I could kind of go through these fears and you could kind of give me like your 2-minute summary of like
Sure.
what you would say to a client that's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about working with you, but I'm afraid of X." How does that
Yeah.
sound?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
absolutely.
well,
Absolutely.
great. Well, then maybe let's start with like the physiology or the mechanism of like, so let's say I start to eat this low carb pattern. What's going to happen in my body that's going to be different?
Yeah. So again, the I mentioned it earlier about insulin resistance. So insulin's a hormone that's made by our pancreas, and since the majority of us have been eating low fat, doing dieting, when you take away the fat, you increase your carbohydrates. And the problem is that our pancreas has to work really hard to process all of those carbohydrates. And so it produces a lot of insulin, which is fine. It's good. It's perfect. If we don't produce a lot of insulin, then our blood sugar rises and we've got, we develop type 2 diabetes. But the problem with that is that insulin has a side gig, and its side gig is fat storage. And so you've now got a hormone floating around in your body that is high, a fat storing hormone. And when insulin is high, you can't actually get your fat stores. So fat is just stored energy. You've got this beautiful storage of energy and you can't get it. So I often use an analogy called the woodshed, and the way I like to describe it is if you imagine your body as a fireplace, and our fireplace uses two forms of fuel. It'll use kindling and it'll use logs. So the kindling is like our carbohydrates. It burns quickly, gives us energy, but it also dies down quite quickly. And in a fireplace, we should, put a little bit of kindling in and then stick some logs on. But if you've got insulin resistance, you don't have any logs next to your fireplace. They're in a woodshed out the back. So you toddle out the back to get your logs and you can see them all lined up. Some people have a big woodshed. And when you go to open the door is locked. And that lock is insulin. It's a padlock of insulin. And some people have maybe half a lock, but some people have 9 or 10 locks on their woodshed. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what they
Yeah.
do. They cannot get them. So they come back to their fireplace, which by now is dwindling down to a few embers, and they're hungry, starving. And their brain starts going, oh my God, eat quickly, quickly. And it suddenly asks for quick, easy access carbohydrates, of course, which we have everywhere, biscuits, chocolate, cookies, bread, everything. So you'll go and make yourself a sandwich and, good, now I feel better. Because the
Yeah.
only way you can get energy is to keep eating, which is why, we've been told to eat 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. But if we do that, we will never, ever tap into our stored fuel. So
Exactly.
When, people start low carb, I always say, "Well, your shed doesn't open overnight. It's gonna take a little while. We need to make sure you do have plenty of fat back in your diet at the start, and then when your shed opens, you can actually reduce your intake of fat because you'll be able to access your own fat and start burning that for your fuel." So it's and again, for a lot of people who have done low fat, you suddenly realize that introducing some fat into your diet is magnificent. It
Mhm.
tastes amazing and keeps you full.
Yeah. I love the shed analogy. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's otherwise it's hard to people get their head around. I think people get mixed up with insulin and glucose and spikes and all of those sorts of things, and it does
Yeah.
become a bit murky. But when you realize it's just about your stored fat and that insulin stops you accessing it, you then realize, right, that's why I've got to get I mean, insulin has
Yeah.
some other things that are not helpful as well, but you just want to get that insulin down back to normal levels so that you can be like a normal fireplace and use a
Yeah.
little bit of kindling and fat.
This is the exact thing I explained in week 1 of what I also actually have a 12-week program, which I saw
Ah,
is yours too.
wonderful.
It's funny. In week 1, we go over this. Like, your whole
Yes.
life, you felt hungry every 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Guess what? It's
Yeah.
because the body fat you have, the food that you're eating makes it inaccessible to you. So, of course, you're hungry.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so when people criticize people for doing that, it's wrong.
Yeah.
People think that hunger is like a character flaw, and again, that's wrong. Hunger
Yeah.
Proper hunger is a physiological process. You're not weak because 'cause you're hungry,
Yeah.
but people again, you're judged and shamed because people go, "Oh my god, you're eating again?" It's like, "Well, yeah,
It's real
I'm
hunger.
starving." You
Yes.
can't be hungry. Yeah, I am. It is, and I think that when go low carb and particularly at the start when you do add in some fat, that revelation, or in my
Yeah.
case, the epiphany of not
The
being
EpiPenny.
hungry. Yeah, the epiphany of not being hungry was so incredible. So incredible.
Yes, and I actually had a journey similar, so I relate. It's crazy. I thought that was like an identity thing, like I am genetically one of those hungry people.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
No, no,
Um,
no, it's just physiology, and so
yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, it's
Okay.
wonderful.
Speed round item number 1. Oh, no, no. I went to see my doctor every year. They check my fasted blood glucose. It's fine. I
Yeah.
don't have an insulin resistance issue.
Yes. So the glucose will only rise right at the end. We need to go further upstream. Your pancreas, as I mentioned earlier, its job is to keep your blood glucose between 4 and 6 in Australia, and I think that's 100
At less
to
than
100 and
100. Yes.
yeah, in American terms. And it will do whatever it can to do that. It's such a good organ. It's trying its hardest to look after you. Some people have a phenomenal pancreas that can produce tons, buckets of insulin. So, but unless you test insulin, you have no idea. You can't test it at home. It doesn't. We don't have a finger prick for it. It can only be done in a lab. And for a lot of doctors, I think it's the same in the States. It's certainly in Australia. They don't check it. They just check the blood glucose, but by the time that starts to rise, we're well and truly down the path of diabetes. And it really bothers me when people go, "Oh, you don't have diabetes, don't worry about it." It's like, "Yet. You don't have it yet." It's like,
Mhm.
well, let's not get it at all. Diabetes has so many this type 2 diabetes that, type 1 is different, obviously, it's an
Of
autoimmune
course.
condition,
Yeah.
but type 2 diabetes causes so much suffering for people as they go on, and that we just minimize it, and people get told they've just got a touch of sugar, or I've just got a little bit of diabetes, or I've got pre-diabetes, I don't need to worry yet.
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So basically, that lab is too little too late to look at this problem that we're talking about, where there can really be 10 to 20 years of accumulating weight and struggling with appetite while this insulin resistance is happening. But you could go in for a fasted blood sugar and have it be a normal level.
Yeah, absolutely, and look, in my practice, I often Not so much if somebody is already low carb, but if somebody's just eating their standard diet, I will do what's called a glucose tolerance test, and I'll do it with insulin levels. So you can actually see exactly how much insulin their pancreas produces when they've had a glucose load. And it's phenomenal. There are people with absolutely normal glucose tolerance tests according to the glucose,
Yeah,
and you see these huge numbers of insulin,
yeah,
which again, insulin, apart from fat storage, has lots of other issues related to, it's a growth like hormone. So it
yeah,
produces, it's a risk for cancer. It's a risk, it increases high blood pressure. It increases, the vascular stiffening. It has so many other
yeah,
issues apart from making us hungry and locking away our fat stores.
totally. Okay. Next objection. I'm worried about risk to my microbiome on this. I've been told I have to eat a lot of fibers and carbohydrates to feed my healthy gut bacteria. What about that?
Yeah. So, I think that again, the fiber myth, there's a lot of who's perpetuating that. A lot of it is perpetuated by the grain companies, and they're an incredibly powerful lobby group. You can get all the fiber you need from eating veggies, and they don't need to be starchy vegetables. You can get fiber from broccoli, you can get fiber from cauliflower, you get fiber from bell peppers. There's plenty of way to get your fiber. Chia seeds,
Nuts
it's
and seeds.
really
Yeah.
yeah, nuts and seeds. It's really the it's a myth. It's a myth. Now, sometimes when people are starting a low carb diet, they will notice change in their bowel. They really will. They'll either get constipated or diarrhea. So again, it's amazing. One way of eating can cause different effects in different people.
Oh,
And I'll
yeah.
often talk to people about the fact that some of that is the microbiome adjusting, some of it is the bowel adjusting, and there's some ways that we can help people with that. But over time, it just recalibrates back to normal.
So it sounds like you do think fiber is important, but that it's just achievable without eating these more high carbohydrate foods.
Yeah, and again, there's some controversy on fiber. There's actually no study. Like there's a recommended amount, but those recommendations haven't really got any science to back them. They're just what a few people or a board of people decided might be reasonable amount. I think it's important for everybody to realize that with recommendations, each person's different. Like it's a bit like salt. Like we've got these recommended salt levels, but there are plenty of people I see who are actually salt deficient,
Yeah.
um, because they're again, if you're insulin resistant, you can't eat as much salt because insulin is involved with glucose in the kidney and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. So it's individualized. This is part of getting to know yourself well. So, as and this may be TMI, as an
Never.
so if I eat nuts, so 2 things with nuts. I have a problem regulating cashew nuts. Now, cashews are a higher carb nut, and I think it is that combination of a little bit of extra carbs with the fat and the salt to make my brain go, "Ooh," and it just
Yeah.
wants a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but if I eat those, it also plays havoc with my bowel, and then
Mm.
I'm in, then
Yeah.
my running to the toilet. But you have to know yourself well. For other
Yeah.
people, it'll be dairy. For other people, it'll be,
Yeah.
again, just learn to know yourself. It's like an
Yeah.
experiment. It's lovely.
Yeah, and what I think about too is we know now that a lot of actual like phytonutrients, like phytochemicals in plants have like prebiotic properties, and fermented foods are very powerful with respect to gut health. And those are all things that you could consume on a low carb diet. And in fact, with the way that it sounds like you and I both do a low carb diet, you're probably eating more phytochemicals when you're on it than the typical American would or any Western eater.
Oh, absolutely, because you're just eating real food.
Yeah,
And again, it's this beautiful thing where people go, "Oh, I can't eat fermented foods because I have histamine intolerance." Oh, well, that's fine. Don't eat them. Like,
yeah,
you again, work out what works for you. Our bodies are so unique that, there are some people who will go, "Oh, cauliflower gives me wind." gas. Okay. Well, a lot of it is because of, um, you and again, look at what else you're eating. But again, with processed foods in particular, they add what I like to call fake fiber in. So it's industrialized fiber. Polydextrose in particular is
Mhm.
a industrial produced fiber, and they add that in and then can slap a great big star on the front of the packet going high in fiber. And then that polydextrose ferments in the gut and causes bloating and gas. And it's unhelpful. So again, you just need to always be looking and work out what works for you.
Sure. Okay, how about this one? I tried a low carb, high fat diet. I went in to see my doctor. They freaked out because I had extremely high cholesterol.
Yep.
So they told me to never do that again. What do you say?
Yeah. So cholesterol, again, it's complex and it's more than just the number. So the total cholesterol is what people get, again, doctors get worried about. Look, I graduated when statins were invented, and they were thought to be like the
Mhm,
greatest
yeah.
invention ever.
Mhm.
And for decades, I never questioned it, never. And I would have given that same advice probably 6 or 7 years ago. In fact, I remember putting people on statins, telling them to stop eating, butter and eat margarine and rubbish like that.
Yeah.
What
Snackles, cookies.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we now know is that that cardiovascular disease, which is why we're worried about cholesterol. We're not The number itself doesn't cause a problem, but our brain goes, "Oh, well, I'm going to now die of a heart attack." And we've got this vision of, which again, perpetuated probably by drug companies, of cholesterol sort of blocking your arteries like fat down a drain, and that you're clogging them. And there's all those sorts of clogging words going on. It doesn't even work like that. It doesn't clog anything.
No.
What we now know, though, is that there are multiple types of LDL in particular. So LDL is the lipoprotein that carries cholesterol around, and that it's the oxidized LDL that is problematic. And there are multiple things that cause oxidized LDL. The number one thing would probably be smoking. Um, there is some genetic people who have something called lipoprotein little a, higher risk of oxidized and smaller dense LDL. But we also now know that high glucose, so people with type 2 diabetes or, uncontrolled type 1 diabetes, glucose will oxidize your LDL and make it small and inflammatory. So I spend a lot of time talking to people about it. It's a reasonable fear of them to have. But if you understand the whole picture and not just look at one little number, then you can make a much better informed decision on what you need to do.
Yeah, I agree. Because people that have that genetic predisposition will typically be more like saturated fat sensitive. So it might be just different. I wouldn't typically recommend that somebody even worry about saturated fat unless they have those genetics. And maybe you do focus more on those natural foods that are higher in those like poly and monounsaturated fats. And then I'm curious what you think on like the research on just like over time. It does seem to be that like it's normal to have like a transient elevation that normalizes over time unless you are one of those people that have that genetic predisposition. But what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite a dynamic marker, and particularly LDL. And
Mm.
you're absolutely right. Particularly if you're having significant weight loss, like
Yeah.
fat loss is burning your triglycerides. So fat's just stored triglyceride in our little adipocytes, which is just our fancy name for fat cells. So when we're mobilizing that, we can't mobilize fat in blood. It has to go onto a protein because it's not soluble. So the only way to move that around is to increase those LDLs to move your fat around initially. So
Yeah.
absolutely, we see it all the time. We see it in bariatric patients. There will be a rise in LDL. So I often recommend to people, look, if you're first starting, don't check your bloods
I
in the
do
first
too.
3 months.
I do
She's going to freak everyone out.
too. Totally.
I know.
Totally.
And the
Yeah,
other thing is
exactly.
to know that it takes decades. Like, it takes a long time for um,
Plaque to develop.
for plaque to develop. Yeah, it doesn't happen over in a couple of months, I think. And this isn't patients' fault. Doctors will do this. They'll recall people as an emergency, an urgent appointment to discuss their cholesterol. And they'll use phrases like, "Oh, you're a heart attack waiting to happen." Well, that's rubbish. It's just rubbish.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's you've got decades.
Absolutely, and like you said, the plaque happens in the context of the LDL, especially the smaller, denser ones, plus the
Mm.
inflammation, which ketones actually are anti-inflammatory. Fat-soluble vitamins typically increase on a low-carb, high-fat, real foods diet, and those are anti-inflammatory antioxidants.
Yep.
Antioxidants come from plants, so, yeah, there's, like, 3 main ways top of mind that you lower inflammation, which is a precursor to the plaque in this environment, so yeah, we think alike on that.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Even just lowering, reducing your abdominal fat. So,
Yeah.
I used to just think fat was a cupboard that you put all your stored energy in, but it's an organ. It produces hormones. It produces something called, adipokines, which are inflammatory mediators. When you close down the inflammation factory by reducing your abdominal fat, again, hugely beneficial for your cardiovascular health.
Yeah. Okay, what about, I'm a woman, and I've been told that women shouldn't go on a low-carb diet, it's not good for us, just in general, and feel free to pick a favorite life stage.
Yeah, well, 1, rubbish, absolute rubbish. Like, again, so I see a lot of young women, as you probably do too, with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it can be really hard
Yeah.
there, if they're not, obviously it affects fertility, but before fertility, they've got acne, they're hairy, they're feeling ugly and frumpy, and they can't understand why they're heavier than their friends. And again, polycystic ovarian syndrome, it just has its roots in insulin resistance, and it's insulin resistance, uh, kind of globally, but also at the ovarian level.
Mhm.
So for those women in particular, it can be life-changing to be able to reduce their insulin
Yeah.
by just changing your food.
Mhm.
Dr. Mary talks a lot. Dr. Mary had, who's my colleague, had PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, and couldn't get pregnant before she knew about low carb. Found low carb, and
Mhm.
yeah, basically fertility restored. It is amazing.
Yeah.
I see menopausal women who gain weight around menopause. It makes absolute physiological sense why you do that. Estrogen in particular is very protective against insulin resistance. And then you lose your estrogen and our insulin resistance just increases. And so what we were doing before suddenly means the foods that we were eating before, maybe we weren't insulin resistant, we were insulin sensitive, didn't cause us the same problems, and all of a sudden they are. So I can't think of a single reason why women shouldn't be low carb. The only thing I would say is that sometimes premenstrually, people do get carb cravings, and that's normal. And so it's about working out, well, what can I do in that time? So, for some people, they may want to increase some of their starchy vegetables in the week beforehand. And I would be saying do things like sweet potato. Don't do chocolate if you
Yeah,
want to. You
sure.
can increase them without with other foods.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's one advantage of your approach around like you're not tracking ketones, you're not giving them a grams of carbohydrate a day because it opens up more availability to track to cycle your macros across your
Yeah,
menstrual cycle. And that could be good for, like you said, for like symptoms that you might be experiencing premenstrually, or also another thing that kind of comes to mind is like activity level and like different types of training that might be more advantageous, like maybe during the luteal phase, for example, you might do better with more carbohydrate for your training in that time. And if you have somebody who's active, I find
yeah,
that my like premenopausal like women who are active, do better on like some carb, a little bit more carb than what would be like a classic ketogenic diet. And so I like how you kind of like leave a window for that by not saying like everybody's going to come in here and eat 20 net grams of carbs a
Yeah.
day, no matter who you are. It's just not always the right fit. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You're like 100. I cannot stress that
Yeah.
enough because, and we have some people that, mm, we may recommend tracking for if they've got a particular goal in mind. So, as an example, if they've got chronic pain and they're wanting to improve their pain levels, then there's a beautiful study by a physio called Rowena Field, who has demonstrated that a ketogenic diet can improve chronic pain. So, for those people, we might say, well, track for a bit, measure your ketones for a bit so that you know what you need to do
Mhm.
if actually being in ketosis is a goal. But you
Yeah.
don't need to be in ketosis to lose weight, and you don't need to be in ketosis to be healthy. But if you want to be, you can, because at the
Sure.
end of the day, you're the boss of you. You
Yes.
get to decide.
What about, I guess we can't leave this one until we go to, what about women who are like pregnant or breastfeeding?
Yeah, so, again, a different kettle of fish. Breastfeeding women in particular, we don't recommend super low carb, or a lot of intermittent fasting for 2 reasons. One, it can, interfere with breast milk supply, and that's unhelpful.
Mhm.
There is a small risk of something called euglycemic ketoacidosis, which is where their normally ketosis is only associated with people with type 1 diabetes or people who are on certain medications. But in breastfeeding women, they get something called euglycemic. So their blood sugar is normal, but their ketone levels go quite high and their blood levels, they become acidotic and very unwell. It's usually when they're doing very low carb, maybe some fasting, and they become unwell themselves. Maybe they get a viral illness. So we think for safety, it would be a minimum of 50 grams of carbs for those women, probably even 80. Um, and it's interesting in pregnancy. So pregnancy, again, another completely different kettle of fish. For a lot of women, morning sickness, it's very hard to manage morning sickness, particularly with a lot of fat. You
Right.
feel really, really unwell.
Yeah.
So again, listen, just you can listen to your body and you can have some carbohydrate. It doesn't mean though that you need to be eating 2-minute noodles and chocolate for your carbs. You can,
Yeah.
just go a bit lower. Again, Dr. Mary had gestational diabetes. She's very her genetics are that she's highly insulin resistant. She has 2 parents with type 2 diabetes. So, it's not her fault that she's insulin resistant. It's gestational diabetes, again, is not a character flaw.
Yeah.
But and managing that for her was quite hard. Even with a low carbohydrate diet, she still needed to have a little bit of insulin in her pregnancy.
Mhm.
Again, it's not a weakness, it's not a failing on her behalf. But what she was able to do was have much less than if she was following a standard diet.
Yeah, we match on that. I think there's a lot of fear about like any restriction whatsoever on any type of carbohydrate for women in general across pregnancy, which gets you to the opposite end of the spectrum where there's more and more prevalence of like excess gestational weight gain and gestational diabetes. Whereas like what we'll do is just switch to real food carbs. So it's like, okay,
Mm,
we're going to still not have a bunch of processed sugar and refined flour if we can avoid it, especially after that morning sickness clears, and then have
yeah.
carbohydrates in the forms of starchy vegetables and potentially some whole grains and legumes, and life is good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. So, Dr. James Mukey, who was the Australian of the Year for us in
Oh,
2020, yeah, he's an ophthalmologist, so an eye surgeon, and has done buckets of work around advocating reducing sugar because he's seen the end point of blindness in people with type 2 diabetes.
yeah.
And just the other day, he posted a graph of the stats of gestational diabetes, which have just gone on a massive upward trajectory since 2010. And it's like, what's going on here? Like it was just on a sort of a normal continuum, and then it's just gone boom. So I think a combination of things with epigenetics. So again, people like Dr. Mary who just genetically have now got increased risk of insulin resistance. But we've tightened up the criteria for gestational diabetes, and it's interesting because I've got 2 girls, and my second child, I didn't meet the criteria back then, but I probably should have. And I ate again, it was in my, pre-epiphany days, so I just ate a whole heap of crap. And I used to joke. I literally joked. Like, I kind of go, "My God, I can't believe I used to say this." I joked about my child's, the umbilical cord direct into her of chocolate. But, and she was a massive, massive baby. She was 10 pound.
Yeah,
So I now think, "Oh," and I know for her that she will have an increased risk of developing insulin resistance as she gets older and developing type 2 diabetes, potentially.
yeah. Okay, real quick, because I do have to let you go off a second. What about micronutrients? There's a lot of foods that I can't eat on this diet, and I am at risk of not meeting all my needs from a nutrient standpoint.
Yeah. This is particular when people go, "But fruit's so healthy and it's got so many vitamins in it." The definition of fruit is, we all think that fruit is sweet food, but technically, things like bell peppers, like zucchini, like
Tomatoes.
tomatoes, yeah, or tomatoes,
Yeah, potato, potato.
yeah, avocados, they're all fruit.
Mhm.
So technically, you still eat plenty of fruit. You're just not eating the sweet fruits. I eat plenty of berries. I don't eat bananas and mangoes anymore because, well, 2 reasons. One, they really do play havoc with my blood sugars, and they also play havoc with my brain around then wanting more and more sugar. So sweet fruits for me are not that helpful. But I mean, I look at what I eat now. I eat a hugely nutrient dense diet. People, I think meat in particular, particularly red meat, people
Yeah.
forget red meat is full of nutrients.
It's like nature's
And
multivitamin. I guess liver, number 1, but beef's up there. Yeah.
yeah, we used to have a campaign in Australia that was called Feed the Man Meat. It actually should have been Feed the Woman
Feed
Meat
the
because
women meat.
yeah, women
Yes,
have very high iron needs. We lose
right.
iron all the time, and meat just got this such bad rap for no reason.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think
eggs are
it's
nutrient
ironic.
dense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
'cause considering that most people are eating all these processed foods and very few nutrient dense foods, that's an
yeah,
ironic thing to worry about
it
if
is
you're going to a real food
absolutely.
diet. Well, then I guess my last question before I ask how people can connect with you is if you think this is a long-term solution like for life, or do you eventually transition people off of it after that sort of shed is more open, and do you see that people can kind of advance on carbohydrates over time or not really?
Depends. Is depends really, and that comes back down to some of your genetics. So if you're very insulin resistant, which again is there is a genetic predisposition for that. So it's like, which is why we see, you might have kids in families and you've got 2 kids, one might be lean and one might be a bit plumper. That the plumper kid just has epigenetics or genetic predisposition for insulin resistance and increased fat storage. So a bit of it depends on who you are, but in general, the thing I would say to people is that the thing you do to lose the weight is the same thing that you do to maintain it. There is this ridiculous maintenance myth that comes
Mhm.
about where you restrict, 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 and again, diet culture, because
Yeah.
then you get to go into maintenance. And the
Or
idea of
even,
getting,
yeah, like it just
yeah,
ends. It's like this extreme phase.
yeah,
It comes to a close at the 30-day or whatever point. Yeah.
yeah, and maintenance was all about eating more food, but if you whatever again, whatever you do to lose it is the same thing that you do to maintain it. So I've been eating this way now for 5 years,
Mm.
and for the first time, again, I've lost and gained that same 40 pounds 100 times over, except recently. My weight has been stable. I never go into my cupboard now and kind of pray that my pants are gonna fit. They just do.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Burns, you are such an incredible light. The world needs you and your message. And so I'm sure a lot of people will be really interested to learn more about your offerings. And so maybe you can just share a little bit about how they can connect with you and how they can get some support.
Oh, Erin, thank you. You're so
Yeah.
kind and generous. And again, same
Yeah.
to you. There is, I think sometimes people get worried that people are gonna, that there's scarcity in work, and I'm just
Ugh,
looking going, oh my gosh,
there's
this
infinite need
this
for this. Infinite.
Absolutely, and again, you and I, it's like us against the processed food industry. It's a juggernaut, and, we're like the little Davids versus Goliaths. So, absolutely. So, all of our socials are Real Life Medicine, so, Instagram, Facebook, and we also have a podcast, and I would love you to come onto it, which is called
Love,
Real Health and Weight Loss. So, really
love.
simple, real health and weight loss, and, would I think just getting that message out time and time again is what people need to hear.
Absolutely. And I know you do run a live program that people can join the wait list, and maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we run a program called the 12-week Mind Body Rebalance. Again, it is that the rebalancing of your metabolic hormones, and so the physiology, and then the psychology, which is really unpacking some of this mindset stuff that we were talking about, and working out why our brain offers us stories about scarcity, about FOMO, about food wastage, and it is like it is the joy of my life to run these programs. They have a pre-recorded component, which is the education, but the live bit is what I love because it's so
Yeah.
interactive, and and people, I don't know, people seem to like it, so we're so happy with.
I'm sure they like it because there's nothing like being trapped in diet culture and just that the emotional and physical harm of that. And so, what you're doing is life changing for people. And so, it's more than liking it, you're changing people's lives. And so, it's amazing that people have that as a resource. And we will
Oh, thank
definitely,
you.
yes, we'll put all the links in the show notes as well so people can connect and get on the wait list and check out your podcast as well.
Absolutely. Oh, that would be wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Erin. It's been fun. I love it.
You as well. Take care. Would love to talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye.